Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Malu Dumim in Israel. Our connection to the world around us is almost entirely through our senses. These five amazing processes, which are hardwired into the body sometime in the womb, give us access to the vast world around us. Its sights, its sounds, its tastes, its smells, and its textures. We really take the time to appreciate this mind-blowing network of communication and awareness with which we essentially become part of the reality within which we live, let alone even acknowledge it. We tend to take our senses for granted. They are there, they work, hopefully, and that's that. The fact is that we probably spend a good deal more of our time and energy fussing about our smartphones than we do our senses. We could easily spend hours a day downloading and uploading and adding and deleting all of that stuff that passes through those little devices, wondering what to save and what to get rid of, and how to make things work a little better, or else when to dump the old one and make the plunge for a newer model. It's quite amazing if you think about it, which most of us don't. We are more concerned with our phones than we are with our innate channels to everything. How did things get to this state? Let's look a little bit at those senses, just for a refresher. We have our eyes, assuming they still work. These highly complex little organs allow us to see everything. They take in light, an electromagnetic wave that really shouldn't have any connection with the mind, but through the various stages of vision manages to make everything in our range accessible to our minds at less than the press of a button. We have all the colors we can possibly use, all the perspective, the motion, and even glimpses of emotion through those living cameras that enable us to be a human version of a god. Then we have our ears. Those complicated little holes on the sides of our heads grant us a whole other world of sensory information. We hear voices, we hear nature, we hear ourselves, we hear threats, and we hear tranquility. We use our ears to hear two of the most wonderful human creations, spoken language and music. These two tools, each a purely human construct, allows us to access both other minds and to ascend the ladder of feelings through nothing more than a series of harmonious sounds. Who could shut their ears to that? Next, we have taste. It's all in the mouth, but what a panorama of possibilities. From sweet to bitter, from tangy to bland, from wet to dry. It ranges from the tasteless but soothing feeling of water on the tongue to the subtle but taste-filled experience of a glass of fine wine. Complementing that is the sense of smell. While it has lost much of its function as we evolved, it still gives us another layer of beauty and unpleasantness to our experience in the world. It opens us up to possibilities that somehow seem beyond the physical, as it reminds us that there is so much more to the world than just the palpable and the visible. Speaking of palpable, the sense of touch is our most direct connection to everything that is not us. We can absorb the reality of the world with the brush of our fingertips. We feel pain and comfort, hot and cold, violence and love through our sense of touch. Our nerve network is like an extension of the brain, telling us what is going on within our bodies and allowing our bodies to have direct contact with what is outside of them. It is our interface with the world. Is there anything in the Bible that parallels this amazing network? This question has numerous possible avenues for answers, but one which comes to mind only if the imagination is allowed to roam free. That imaginary sense analogy is the Mishkan, the tabernacle that the Israelites constructed in the desert, which they took with them everywhere they wandered for 40 years. They brought it to the Holy Land, and it remained the central shrine for centuries. It was only abandoned when they built a much more elaborate replacement in the form of a temple. But it is unclear if the souped-up model ever outshone the original. There was something about the simplicity of the Mishkan that could never be outclassed by a building made of stone. This week's Parsha is called Terumah. It is a short title for a fairly short Parsha which deals with one subject only, the Mishkan. There is no storyline, no real people involved. Even God takes a bit of a backseat to the Mishkan itself. The construction of the Mishkan takes up the bulk of 4 entire parshas in the Torah, all of them towards the end of the book of Exodus. There is a lot of what seems like repetition and a considerable amount of confusing details. But in the end, the Mishkan gets completed by the end of the book. The physical layout of the Mishkan is contained almost entirely in this week's Parsha. This includes the structure itself and the courtyard surrounding it. The courtyard was a rectangle about 50 meters by 25 meters. It was marked off by tapestries strung on poles. Most of it was empty. In fact, there were only 3 things in this courtyard: a large altar for animal and agricultural offerings, a small washstand, and the Mishkan itself. The Mishkan was a rectangular building about 15 meters by 6 meters with a height of about 5 meters. That would make it seem rather high and narrow from the inside. It also had very little in its interior. There was almost nothing cluttering it up. It contained a total of 4 things inside: an altar for incense that was much smaller than the exterior altar, a table for holding the bread, a candelabra called a menorah, and the Ark of the Covenant. There was also a partition dividing the interior into 2 unequal sections. About 2/3 of it was its outer room, called the Holy, which contained everything except the Ark, and the remaining 1/3, which was called the Holy of Holies, which contained the Ark alone. That was it. It is quite surprising, with all these parshas devoted to the Mishkan, that it only contained these items and nothing else. It was all very simple. A mere glance from the right perspective, and one would have conceivably taken in everything included in the Mishkan. And most of that was purely functional. The washstand was for washing the hands and the feet. The altars were offerings of various types. The menorah was for light. The table was for holding the bread. The Mishkan itself was to provide shelter for the things inside it and to shield what went on inside from outside view. It was only the Ark which was mysterious and otherworldly. It is given the singular description in the Parsha of, quote, "I will commune with you there, and I will speak to you from above the Ark cover, from between the 2 cherubs that are on the Ark of the Testimony, concerning all that I will command you regarding the Israelites." What about that analogy to the senses? How does any of that fit into this very simple Mishkan structure? The analogy is not difficult and does not require all that much of a stretch of the imagination. First, there is the obvious. The menorah, the sole source of light in the Mishkan, is analogous to the eyes, which use light to provide vision to the mind. The incense altar represents the sense of smell, since the sole function of the incense was to give off a pungent fragrance. The table represents taste, for that was the only place in the Mishkan that had any food on it. Touch was provided by the skins and tapestries which made the walls of the Mishkan and the partition dividing it into 2 rooms. There was not much light inside, so a good deal of orientation within the Mishkan relied on feeling those walls and knowing where everything was. Sound was the single sense that is difficult to place in the Mishkan. But even here, there is a fairly straightforward representation. That verse just quoted, which describes the purpose of the Ark, gives the single example of sounds within the Mishkan. Other than whatever sound or vibration came from this mysterious form of divine communication, everything was utterly silent. There were no sounds from the menorah, the table, or the incense altar, and certainly none from the walls or the roof. It was only the Ark, with its cover formed in the shape of those cherubs facing each other with wings spread, which provided anything remotely resembling what we call sound. If anything was the ears of the Mishkan, it was the Ark with its cover, which was almost like an antenna to the divine. So there we have it. The Mishkan is a bit like the body, with these various items comprising the senses which connected it to the outside world. They are all representative if one opens up the imagination a bit and allows a little poetic license. It is unclear if any of this was included in the original intent of the Mishkan, or if any of it is hinted at in the Torah's description. But we can allow ourselves this tiny bit of creativity in making it all a little more relevant to our lives. While all this is really nothing more than an embellishment on this otherwise ancient and remote structure, which has not been in existence for close to 3,000 years, it does allow us to feel the Mishkan a little more within ourselves, which is one of the key descriptive phrases in the Parsha. Before any of the individual items are described, we read the initial command for the entire thing. Quote, They shall make me a sanctuary, and I shall dwell among them. It is quite amazing if we compare this structure with our lives today. The Mishkan, in spite of its seeming complexity in the Torah's description, was actually extremely simple. It was a few items, which may have been elaborately made, but essentially did nothing but be there, and the structure itself. The really unusual thing, of course, was the ark. Even with that analogy of the senses, there was really nothing that was happening in the Mishkan. This is so unlike our busy and cluttered lives today that it seems like another world. The most noticeable thing about the Mishkan was its simplicity. The most noteworthy thing about its relation to the senses was that they were all barely there. The menorah was faint and only gave light to the outer room. The table only contained unspiced bread. The walls and curtains were not meant to be felt. The fragrance of the incense was strong, and that alone stands in contrast to our world. But the sound was provided by the voice of God from upon the ark. What did that sound like? We really don't know. It's a good bet that if we somehow recorded it, we wouldn't hear anything. There was probably nothing but silence. This is fascinating. The sole sound in the Mishkan, which was the channel through which the voice of God was heard, was silence. That's something to ponder while going on a nice long walk in the woods. To hear the voice of God, we need silence. Anything else would drown out the message. Shabbat Shalom.